on for. And I know it's late, and I know you all want to get back and have a beer, and it's been... How are you enjoying the show so far? It's good?
Yeah.
You got what you came for? This is a talk about building great teams. This is absolutely, definitely audience participation, well, team participation, so you guys at the back are not safe. I'm curious. I would very much like to know why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of this. I told you it was audience participation. It starts right at the beginning. Why are you here?
I am a Java developer, and I have been volunteered as a Scrum Master for a small team.
Okay.
And to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience in team building, getting teams to work together, and I'd like to know.
Okay. So basically, you're now in the position where you're managing the team and you want to learn some skills. Is your team a well-functioning team already?
Moderately.
Okay, let's put that question out. How many people think that they're in a highly functioning team? Did you say highly? A highly functioning team, you do. Okay, 4 or 5 out of maybe 100, not many. This is quite interesting. I am a consultant. As you can imagine, as a consultant, I have been to an awful lot of job interviews. And I keep hearing the same thing at interview after interview. Get out, don't come back. No, that one. We are a #1 team. We are the best team. We have the best people on our team. Do you think you're good enough even to interview with us? I guess you've all heard that, right? Merely by the law of averages, they can't all be right. But actually, getting into some of these teams, a lot of them are dead wrong. A lot of these teams are highly dysfunctional. They are not the best people. They are not the best functioning teams. And so I became interested in what it was that makes a well-functioning team, what it is that people feel that they're building when they're building a highly functioning team, and what's going wrong when the bosses and the interviewers say, we have a highly functioning team, and all of the troops on the ground actually disagree with them, and they're all complaining. Don't rhyme. So, I have a question to ask. Since people talk about these highly functioning teams, since people talk about the best team, since most of us are not working in them, but we all have a vision of what they are, what are they? Who has the best teams in the world? So, this is the question I'm going to ask you. Anybody. If you could work for any software company, and I presume you're all software developers, yeah? Okay. If you could work for any software company in the world, who would it be? Who would it be, sir?
Google.
Google. Now, I was going to do this, actually, as a family fortunes game. We asked, what's the best software company to work for? Our survey said, Google. So, why have you selected Google? What's so good about Google?
Looks like a lot of fun, get a lot of freedom. Interesting work.
More, anybody else? It looks like a lot of fun, you get a lot of freedom, you're doing interesting work. Come again? Actually, they're not, but okay, it's a good observation. From what I've heard, they pay lousy. Any other observations? What was that?
Respect.
Respect. Whose respect?
Mutual respect.
Yeah. Yes, within the team. Once you're there, then you know you've made it, everybody else knows you've made it, everybody treats you as a grown-up. Yeah, that's a big thing about Google, and it's one of the things that people do say about it. So you have the freedom to do what you want, you have the ability to make change, and you get the respect once you get in there. Okay, good. Another suggestion. Who would you like to work for? If you could work for anybody. You're actually allowed to choose your own company if you aren't. You don't have to, there's no bosses here.
I actually like to feel I'm doing something of value, so I would probably go back and be a civil servant again.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm asking specifically about software companies, but I'm going to come back and ask you about that, because I'm going to ask about other types of companies later on. So I will come back to you. If I don't, remind me. Stick your hand and go, Jay, what's your problem? Somebody else. Who else would you like to work for?
Well, maybe not a software company, but like there are divisions of NASA that I would love to work for.
Again, I'll come back to you because that's part of the next one. Software companies. Who? GitHub. Okay, good one. Tell me about GitHub. And if anybody has better handwriting than me, I invite you to come and try it. Sorry, where's GitHub? Yes?
I don't know. I guess developer peers will use it, you know, and I guess respect.
Respect from?
My peers.
Yeah.
And sort of building to be useful. People use all the time.
Okay. So the main points that you're bringing out here is that you're getting respect from your peers, but you're also making a difference in the world.
Maybe actually not the respect. Maybe just that actually people are really grateful for the job I'm doing.
Yeah, so you're making a change. That's the fundamental thing. It's not you can go to a party and say, hey, I work for GitHub, aren't I great? It's not about that. Okay, more. Any others?
Other companies or other reasons for GitHub?
Either. Have you got more reasons for GitHub?
They're really open about what they do, and they talk about their internal processes, and they seem pretty sound.
And why is that important to you?
I think because they're the general tradition of tech being a fairly open field where people share knowledge, so you don't just, you try not to stockpile it up. Well,
So,
maybe you do in a company.
can I summarize that by characterizing it as a sense of community? Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's a voice over here. Yes.
So I was going to say, because you put company very specifically about how does open source kind of fit into this? Is that where you go with the word community? So if I had a choice, I might actually not work for a company and choose to work on open source projects. And I would do that under the sense of I want to give something back to the community as a whole.
Okay, I'm going to accept that because I think that's an important thing. I mean, it starts in the sense of community. It's the idea of giving back. One of the reasons why I'm asking you to concentrate on companies is because a company name it acts as a sort of a focus, a concentration of a culture. And so different companies have markedly different cultures, and we can use that to analyze them. The trouble with open source, it doesn't work that way because it's everybody just working on their own in a much more separate, much less cohesive manner. So it's like pointing to fog. There's nothing really there to analyze in these terms. But yes, certainly the observation is very well made that open source does deliver that sense of community. Okay, any other suggestions? Microsoft, okay. There was a time when they were absolutely hated, but they seem to have rehabilitated themselves now. Tell me, why have you selected Microsoft?
Because they're developing stuff all the time. They bring out really exciting new tools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again,
It's used worldwide.
yeah. So again, it's this very wide usage, and it's the fact that they're explorative and innovatory.
Yes, AI, they're doing lots of work there.
Yeah.
Things, and not just business.
Okay. Anybody would disagree with that? Okay, that's interesting, because 18 months ago, people would have done. 18 months ago, people would have said, Microsoft, oh, so boring. All right, any other examples?
Valve.
Sorry, who?
Valve.
Valve.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I'm sorry, you probably can't see this at the back at all. Tell me about Valve.
Apparently they have a very flat structure.
Yes.
Employees are given freedom to work on what they want, what they feel their value. So you might end up with a whole bunch of guys working on a particular software project for the game, leaving other stuff behind because they feel like they're more value.
So again, this is absolutely about the freedom to do what you want. Okay. This idea of the freedom to do what you want keeps coming up. I'm actually going to come back to this in a moment. I'm really surprised because there's one company that hasn't appeared yet, which, go on. Facebook. Facebook, okay. Why Facebook? Okay, all right. Well, I'm sorry, you volunteered. You're in the frame now. Tell me about Facebook.
I don't like Facebook.
You don't?
So I wouldn't have picked them, yeah. So, but Facebook is kind of you train the kid on the block, kind of does cool stuff, but isn't quite that thing anymore that it used to be.
Okay. So it was the trendy kid on the block. It was doing good things, and now it's lost its way. And is anybody here prepared to stand up and defend Facebook? Again, that's really interesting.
No, I think they're doing fascinating stuff behind the scenes, but up front maybe it doesn't look like they're doing a whole lot. But I mean, their data work is incredible.
And
Okay.
they're also working on AI. I mean, they are solving really big, cool problems.
They
and working to unimaginable scales.
They are. I think that what Facebook has done, in fact, is they started off with one kind of promise, and they said, look, it's really, really fun just to pile in here, and it's a scrum in the rugby sense. And now they've become a much more mature and adult and much more scientific company. And they've sort of almost alienated their fan base, which is interesting because they're still doing, I think they're a much more interesting company now than they used to be. Now, the one that's missing from this list...
Netflix and Spotify.
I'm sorry?
Netflix and Spotify. Two others that
Okay, Netflix and Spotify. They're also pretty good. Tell me why you've selected them.
Netflix because they seem to have a really healthy relationship with microservices, and that would be fun to work with. And I mean, I know people who work there love it. That's part of it as well. Spotify, kind of the same reason. A lot of Python, I can do that.
Yep.
Friendly people.
Okay, all right. The one that's missing is Apple. In my previous job, my team came to me and said, why are we doing this boring shit? Why can't we do what Apple did? And that was the language they were using to express their frustration with the job they were being asked to do. And yet you haven't picked it up. Is anybody prepared to stand up for Apple here?
They're a terrible software company.
Why?
Apple don't do software.
What do they do?
Apple, I mean, you can tell by their developer tools and the way the languages that they use are written that they're not developer focused. Apple are consumer focused.
They
the
are.
end point is the consumer, and if it's hard for the developer to create that content, they don't care, provided it's easy for the consumer to use. Not a good software company at all.
Okay. Now, you see, I think this is what's interesting about Apple, because the impression that Apple projects is that they are totally consumer-focused. They make a computer as easy to operate as a fridge. They're renowned for their design. And yes, they make it hard for programmers. Jobs used to reduce programmers to tears, but he was doing it in pursuit of a vision. And the reason why I think Apple is important and should be on the list is because out of all of these companies, Apple is the one which really does have a vision. I mean, Google is sort of doing all sorts of things. Facebook is into a general kind of big data and is trying to be a new Google. All of these people are trying to do things, but Apple has this sense of this is what we're put on the planet for. And the people who are favorable towards Apple, this is what they're responding to. It's this big goal, this big sense of vision, this sense of purpose that's in the company. Would anybody like to disagree with that? Go ahead.
Basically, you look at Apple, you just look at the machine that is designed to make money.
Yeah, I don't think most people consider, they may consider themselves to be a software company, but I don't think most people in this room would perceive Apple as being a software company.
Okay, that is really interesting. As I say, 18 months ago, Apple would have been the first on the list. And now, go ahead.
I suppose it's also ethically doesn't appeal to me personally, the whole paradigm taking over the world. Although Microsoft comes under
Yes.
and Google.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, all three of them were trying to take over the world, but in different ways. Okay. But, they're trying to take over the world, but you've got to admire their ambition. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It almost became a generic name like Uber, didn't it? They did well. Be fair, they did well. The reason for doing this is that there is a pattern developing. You can see that the companies that you admire, the companies that you're purporting that you would want to work for, they've all got similar sorts of things going on. Okay, leave out the Apple with a vision thing, because we're going to look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. But we're seeing the same sort of things. It's about autonomy. It's about respect. It's about having interesting things to do. It's very much about the nature of the work and your place in the world as you're doing that work, right? It's not enough to be doing interesting things. There is not one military company on this list. So it's not enough to be doing interesting things. They're doing interesting things in the military companies, but they're not the kind of people who you admire because they're not doing it for the right reasons. There are companies here who are doing some there are companies who are doing some very interesting things, but they're doing it in very formal, very restrictive ways. They try to box people in, and they say, well, become specialists and learn a very narrow trade. But that's not exciting, because what you prefer, what's coming back here, is you want to be able to have the autonomy to do what you want to do. Okay? You want to be able to make a change within the company. So now, what I want to do is I want to widen this question. I want to ask a slightly bigger question, which is what we were pushing towards a moment ago, which is, if it's not a software company that you want to work for, if it's some other kind of company, who would it be? Who are the companies who you admire most in the world who are not making software? Who wants to start? Go ahead, sir. SpaceX. Okay. Now, do you want to tell us about them? They are. And why is that interesting? Have you seen Gravity? Who wants to be in space?
It feels like we're kind of going backwards for the last 20, 30 years, providing that drive to push it back forward.
Okay.
You can see an intercept.
Do you know what they like to work for?
No idea.
Anybody have any idea what they like to work for? The goal is enough, isn't it? Okay. Keep that thought. Give me another example.
KPMG.
Who?
KPMG.
KPMG. Tell us about KPMG.
One of the big contractors on that. And we have great values. I'm working for KPMG.
This is your employer? No, that's okay. That's okay. This is your best job. From here on, it's all downhill, right?
At least for another 5 years, I'm looking for this company.
Okay. So what is so motivating about working for them?
We have a very big team, and we do respect each other. That's respect for me is a big priority, and open and honest conversations if there are some issues between the team members.
Mm-hmm.
We do file tax returns lots for big clients and for small clients as well as corporate or individual.
Okay. I'm not going to let you advertise to the other contractors here, but thank you. But the point that you're making is that it is a sense of a coherent, well-integrated team,
Values.
and you have the respect. And the values. Tell us about the values.
Which I have mentioned already.
Okay.
Positive team spirit and
Right. Okay, so they're inward-looking values rather than outward-looking values.
You know your place within the firm. They've worked really hard to try and, we're a small team within a wider firm, but we know our place and how we contribute to the wider.
Okay, fair enough. Understand, thank you. Any more suggestions? Sorry, where was that? Yes, sorry, sir. Tell me again. Koenigsegg.
Yeah. I'd like to see your license.
Go for it, man. Okay, tell us about them.
They actually make they hand build cars.
Right,
Awesome, very expensive cars,
right.
but they aim for perfection, and they seem to attain it.
So it's this sense of perfection which is appealing to you. Okay.
Oxford University. I'm from
You're from.
the educational sector. That's
Right.
the best.
Okay. So there's this sense of excellence, there's a sense of absolutely being the best. Normally, 18 months ago, that would have been Apple, but we've got the car company, we've got Oxford University. Any other examples of that? Yes?
Cancer research.
Cancer research. They also represent that kind of excellence. That's why you're picking them up.
Yeah,
Okay.
just the bench of James.
Okay. Do you happen to work for them?
No.
Okay, right. Help me out here. How do you spell that car company? Like that. Close enough. Okay. Yes.
Bloodhound SSC.
Tell me about them.
It's a company or firm the end build supersonic car to take the world land speed record.
Okay.
And I like it because it's horrendously technically complicated to make a car go at supersonic speed, and it serves no purpose whatsoever. they're not going to sell anything, they're not going to make any money, they're not going to cure any disease. The only reason they're doing it is just for the hell of doing it, because a bunch of guys went, and when I say guys, I mean females as well, there's a lot of women in the team. A bunch of people just got together and went, we're doing this because we can.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize that. This is a really big goal, and they're prepared to just kick everything else aside in pursuit of the goal. They have vision.
Yeah, and there's no reward at the end other than doing it. They're not going to sell. Yeah, they're not going to sell it to anybody. They're not going to mass produce supersonic cars.
Okay, thanks. You had your hand up. Please do. Who? Right, and why would you never work for them?
They don't value their people.
And how do you know they don't value their people? Did you used to work for them?
I know a lot of people that have worked there.
Okay, and how is this not valuing their people manifest?
They basically burn them into the ground.
Okay.
And then when they're done, they get rid of them.
Right, so basically they treat people as consumables. Yeah. Okay, so that's actually in direct opposition to some of the things that we've identified today is what makes a good team. I'd like to make a couple of suggestions of my own. Boeing, the people who make the aeroplanes. Boeing invented the 747, or they designed the 747, at a time when nobody had a use for an aeroplane that big. There were only 6 runways in the world big enough to accommodate it. They were building this plane with no customers. In the last 3 months before they shipped the first one for the first demonstration flight, the people who worked for the company worked for no money because the company had run out of funds, but they still wanted to get this aircraft ready, which had no customers. Now that speaks to vision, it speaks to goal, but it speaks to something else. It speaks to this vision and the goal going right down to the people on the shop floor. And I think that a company that can do that, that can articulate that vision and get its people to work for nothing on a promise, basically, I think there's something going on in that company that we need to look at. So I nominate Boeing. I have one other nomination, and that's Johnson's. Johnson's is a healthcare company. You know them. They make baby food, they make pharmaceuticals, all sorts of things. They have something on their website. They wrote it in the 1920s. They call it the Credo, and I think that it's one of the finest pieces of business writing ever written. It says, we believe in, our first priority is to the families and to the healthcare professionals who use our products. And then it works its way down, all the way through the various snouts in the trough until it gets to the bottom and says, and we believe that we can make a fair profit for our shareholders whilst doing all this. Now, the net result of this is that every single person in the company knows what their priorities are. They know what they're in it for. And so, back in the 80s, they were the target of a terrorist attack where somebody was putting ground glass into the baby food. It took 48 hours, and every single product that they had out on the shelves was cleared. Literally, people who worked for the company would go to the supermarket and sweep stuff into the trolley, and they say, we'll pay for it later, just don't care, we're clearing it. And they did this without any instruction. Remember, this is the 80s, no internet, nothing like that. They just did it because they understood their priorities. Heinz was also a target of the same attack. They dithered for 2 weeks, and it took them 20 years to recover their reputation. So again, this is a company who has an absolute clear notion of why they're in business, and we're able to articulate it so clearly that in a crisis, every single person in the company knew exactly what they were supposed to do. So again, this is a company which I think has got something to teach us about what a good team should be. Any observations at that point? Would you like to challenge me, or shall we move on? Okay. I have a third question. Not companies. What are the highest performing teams in the world, commercial or non-commercial, in any context?
UK cycle team.
I'm going to generalize, but I'm going to call it a sports team, but I think that it's probably the generality is going to be fair enough. Tell us about the cycle team.
The guy who runs it, Dave Brailsford, he set down 5 years ago now, and he looked at the drugs cheating that was going on in cycle, specifically distance cycling, and he said that he believed that if you made what he called marginal gains, so if you looked at everything that it took to win the Tour de France, right, and made a 10% gain in every small part, sorry, a 1% gain in every small part, he said his team, done that way, would be better than any drugs cheat, because you can only get a 30%. He said you'd only get a 30% gain from cheating through drugs. And he said, but a 1% gain over everything that it takes to win the Tour de France, he said, will give you a better advantage. And he sat down at a news conference and said that his team, he would have a winner of the Tour de France within 5 years. And everybody, particularly the French press, laughed at him, basically, called him an idiot, and he did it in 3 years.
What about great coaching and drugs?
It's not, yeah.
Okay.
Both together.
Write that down.
Okay. Any more examples of sports teams? Any sportsmen here?
NHS.
I'll come back. Sports teams.
All Blacks.
I'm sorry?
The All Blacks rugby team.
The All Blacks. Are you a rugby player yourself?
Yeah, years ago.
Okay. Why have you nominated the All Blacks?
I live in New Zealand. But
Okay. That's cheating. Okay.
I'm originally from Wales, so for years the All
Wales.
Blacks have been the best team in the world. And the other teams are constantly catching up, but then the All Blacks will then move ahead again. They've lost 2 games in 2 years.
Okay. So you're nominating them because of their success. How have they achieved that success?
I think it's constant reevaluating of their processes, their standards, lifting their standards all the time. And they do it with an enjoyment of the game.
Yeah. Yes, they are motivated, they know why they're doing it, they have an enjoyment of the game, they're constantly revising their strategy. But I actually want to talk about strategy and about what that means, because there's something funny about sports teams which I've noticed, which sort the sheep from the goats. Think of a football team. How many of you have kids? How many of your kids play football at school? Right? And you go and see them. What does school football look like? You have a ball, you have 22 kids around it, moving around the field, and nobody gets a clear shot at anything. And it's enough that somebody kicks the ball 5 yards. But real football doesn't look like that. Real football, the players spread out across the field, and they're everywhere. And one person will pass a ball, and then another person will pass it, and they will touch it for a second or two, and then pass it on to somebody else. And they have these strategies and plays which everybody plays their part in. And somebody makes a play for the goal, they get the goal, but they know that they couldn't have made that goal without the setup. So what's the first thing they do? They acknowledge. They turn around and acknowledge their teammates. So what's going on here is there's a degree of specialism happening. It's not enough to be a good striker. You have to have good wingers. You have to have good defenders. That's true in the rugby team. In a rugby team, you have to know not just, the way you design your strategies is you figure out what the roles are on the field and you figure out who's going to do them, and then everybody gets good at them. And that's an important thing that I want to bring out. We've been talking about respect and we've been talking about collaboration, but what we haven't done is talked about where that comes from. And these sports teams, they're starting to give an indication of what that would be. Questions at that point? Okay, another suggestion. An A&E department. Good. In fact, I'm going to generalize that again to be emergency services in general. Are you happy with that? Okay. Okay, emergency services. Tell us about emergency services.
Extremely high pressure environment.
Yep.
I think we're all well aware they're overworked and underpaid.
Mm-hmm.
They still rock up every day and deal with whatever comes in through the door.
Okay, and how do they deal with whatever comes through the door? I mean, they don't say, come on, pull yourself together. It's a bit more than that. What do they do?
Well, yeah, you triage it, prioritise,
Yep,
and then delegate appropriately.
yep. And delegating appropriately means,
You might send them off to have wards, send them off for scans. Might get sent home told to go to their GP next day.
okay. So let me review this. And this is true of most emergency teams. What you'll do is you'll have an initial triage, which says, what are we being faced with? And then you will find some expert who will deal with it. You'll find a cardiologist, or you'll find an what do we call a guy who sets bones? But whatever it is, you will find the correct person to deal with this case. And if you don't know who the correct person is, you find somebody who can tell you. So at each point, you're saying, who's the expert? Give him to him. And if somebody comes up to you and says, look, the bad news is you're having a heart attack, but the good news is this is my first. That's not what you want to hear, is it? You want him to say, and you're my 1000th, and I haven't had a fatality yet. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for this absolute expertise. It's not enough that they're motivated. It's not enough that they're putting up with difficult work environments. It's not even enough that they're on 30 cups of coffee a day. What you want is you want them to be really skilled and experienced in their specialism. And this is true whether it's an A&E department, or whether it's firemen, or whether it's a special police unit, or whether it's a military unit, whatever it is, what you're looking for is that you've got specialists who are very, very experienced, but who are able to communicate with each other. And again, this goes back to our notion of what a team should be. Okay, any other examples? Who would like to suggest another form of high-functioning team? I would consider that to be the same thing. But again, they work in exactly the same way. You've got people who know how to get you in, you've got people who know how to blow up a bridge, you've got people who know how to get you out again. It's a small team of specialists, and everybody has their own job. What about the... I'm going to come to that, because I think that is absolutely key to the good functioning of the team. And that's true in the A&E team as well. But I think I want to expand that later. But yes, well spotted. Any other examples?
Space station crew.
Okay. Have you been on a space station? I'm asking just for interest. It'd be great if you had. You could have taken the microphone. Tell us about that.
Well, I guess, first of all, they are all-round people, most of all.
Mm-hmm.
Know almost everything about everything. Because usually, if for long-service people, they stay for 6, 12 months,
Mm-hmm.
one or two goes home, go home, a couple more, join the team. So basically, you have good replacement, so you cover all bases. So, I don't know.
Okay. You see, I don't know enough about how they function, but it seems to me that if everybody can do every job, then what you don't have is much of a team. What you have is people treading on each other's toes, potentially.
Yeah, but it has to be a team, because you stay in a close for...
You certainly have to be able to get on. It's true. But can you imagine if you had a fight? That would never end. All right, I have a suggestion. How about a musical group? And it doesn't really matter if you are a pop group, just like a little club group, or if you're a 100-piece orchestra, the same principles still apply. Everybody in a musical group has a job to do. The drummer is laying down a rhythm, which everybody's playing to. The guitarists are playing something to sing to, and then the singer steps up to the microphone, and he's going to sing. When he does that, where is he? Where is he facing? He's at the front of the stage, facing his crowd. He has absolute faith in the guys behind him to do what they're supposed to do. He doesn't look round, because that's the drummer's job, right? He doesn't say, because that's the guitarist's job. They're going to make him look good if only he's prepared to do his job. Same thing goes on with an orchestral group. In an orchestral group, you'll have a conductor, and the conductor is doing a fairly similar job to what the drummer is doing in a pop group. Fundamentally, he's holding everybody together. There was an interesting exercise shortly after Perestroika. There was a Russian musician called Sergei Kuryakin who came up with an idea called popular mechanics. And his idea was, let's take a bunch of musicians who are all experts in their field and put them in a room together and start conducting and see what happens. So he would take a classical violinist, a jazz saxophonist, a Balinese drummer, and then somebody else and just start conducting. And it was really interesting for about 3 minutes, and then it had said all it had to say. So the thing is that you need more than mere expertise. What you need is this sort of shared grammar. You need this shared language. The reason why a group can play together, even if they've never played together before, is because everybody understands what the language is around a group. Everybody understands what the language is around an orchestra, and they all step into that space. And as you get more experience with each other, then you can do more challenging things. But fundamentally, the same thing happens. This is like the sports team. Everybody has their job to do, and everybody trusts everybody else to do that job. And one of the highest expressions of this is in a film crew. Now, to make a movie takes hundreds of people. And all you ever see on the screen is the actors. But before the actors can do anything, you need a scriptwriter. And once the scriptwriter has done his job, and actually he's probably writing continuously, then you need a director to say what the shots are going to be, how you're going to assemble the visual story. And the director is reliant on the cameraman to make sure that what he's got in his head actually appears on the screen. And the cameraman is reliant on makeup and costume and all of those other people, hundreds of people. And if one of them doesn't do their job, then the whole thing fails. And it's really interesting on a film set what happens, that people are working very, very closely together for a long period of time, and they're such tight friends until the job's over, and then everybody's going to go away again and find other projects to do. And they have this enormous party because everybody knows, yes, we did what we came to do, we've done it, it's been great, have a nice life, and off they go. So again, I would say that a film crew is one of these very high-functioning teams. Any observations? Sorry, come again?
How do you balance specialism with not having maybe a single point of failure in a small team?
Well, actually, I don't. I actually think that having multiple points of failure is good for a team. It might not be good for the employer, but it's good for the team, and I'm going to show you why. Would anybody else like to add anything to that list? Any kind of teams or groups that we haven't covered that you think would be helpful here? Yes, so in general, a crew that's working together, so a ship's crew or an aircraft crew, similar sorts of things, possibly less intense, although maybe not on an aircraft, but less intense than some of these other ones, but certainly it's the same thing that's going on. It's the fact that everybody is reliant on everybody else to do their job. The pilot can't do anything without the guy in the engine room, for example. Any other examples? I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I still didn't hear.
Disneyland staff.
Disneyland staff. Oh, now that's a good example. Now, what do you know about Disneyland? Do you know what the job description is for those people at Disneyland? They're called performers. The people who sweep the streets, the people who serve the food, they're called performers. And the reason why they call them that is because whatever else you do, you're on stage, you're in front of people. Your job is to make these people happy. And you can make them happy by giving them food, or you can make them happy by picking up the litter, but your primary job is to make them happy. Disney himself said this was where people come to be happy. And it was the whole idea behind Disneyland itself. And it's interesting, again, to see how a vision like that, and Disney was truly a visionary, how he could take these ideas and then recreate language to express to people how he wanted them to behave and how he wanted them to deliver that. So yeah, that's a very good example. What are we doing for time? Why is this doing this to me? Every day, this computer has been giving me trouble. What I'm going to do is I want to go back over all of these things that we've looked at, all of these different companies, all of these different types of companies, all of these different teams, and I want to find out what they all have in common. Because if we can understand what all of those things have in common, if we can put those into our development teams, then we're going to have high-functioning development teams. That would seem reasonable, yes? Okay. The very first thing these people have is competence. You cannot build a team from people who don't know their job. The good news is, you're my first heart attack victim. That's not competence, okay? Or how about the singer who steps up and he's just about to sing and the guitarist can't play? Back to the Future, remember that scene in Back to the Future where he lost his fingers? Okay. So you need a basic competence. If you can't sing, you can't be in our band. Or if you can't play, you can't be in our band. Or if you don't know basic medicine, you can't be in our department. Or whatever it is, you need that basic competence. And when we recruit, we tend to be reasonably good at testing for basic competence. It's one of the things that I've found. People will come to me and say, I know how to program. And I will say, oh, yeah, can you? And yes, I've done this, and I've been a senior developer in this. And okay, then, right. If you want somebody to believe you're funny, you don't tell them you're funny, you tell them a joke. If you want me to believe you can program, don't tell me you can program, write me a program. And you wouldn't believe the number of people who can't. So, most people test for some kind of programming competence. But in every one of these teams, this competence is a given. But that's not enough. We've just seen that that's not enough because that's what creates that mess in popular mechanics. That's what Kryakin showed. We need something else. We need to say, okay, don't just come and play the same 3 chords for 15 years. That won't inspire anybody. That doesn't create a good team. Don't write the same program over and over again. Several times we had, coming out of this, out of the analysis, people were saying, we want big goals. We want something interesting to do. Now, what interest means is something that we haven't already done. And from our point of view, this is quite a hard thing because the way you get to be a good heart surgeon is by doing lots of heart operations. The way you get to be a good developer is by writing lots of programs. But we don't get to write our programs lots of times. We only get to write them a few times. So there's very few places which actually build stretch into the working environment. And it's a problem because if we need it to form good teams. So when you go back to your managers and you're explaining to them what they need to do, part of what they need is these goals just to get you pushing yourself as developers. Not leave it to your own devices, but really step out, push you outside of your comfort zone. And I'll tell you why this is so important. I mentioned earlier on this job that I was at, where people were saying to me, why can't we do what Apple did? So I said, all right then, we will. And I stood in a room and I put up a list of skills. I said, these are the things that we need to know how to do that we don't know how to do. We have to get these skills into the company. This isn't even an exhaustive list. There are other things that we need as well. So here's the deal. We now have, as from today, an unlimited training budget. We will send you on the courses, we will buy you the books, we will send you back to university if you want, but the training budget is unlimited. Come to me and tell me what you want. I had 22 people in the room, I had another 10 people on VC. How many people took me up? 2, 3, 0. Not a one. Because what they wanted was they wanted to be Apple, but they didn't want the stretch because they had settled into a much more relaxed culture. So that was what I would call a low-functioning team. So you absolutely have to build stretch in. All of these high-functioning teams do. The musical group is always trying to do something else. Disneyland, they're always saying, how can we improve? Things like Kanban at Toyota, it's always about how we can make it better, which is one of the reasons why they're such a good company. Every sports team, the All Blacks, the reason why they're so good is because they're constantly refining their techniques and they're constantly pushing themselves. Okay? It's all about building stretch into the way you work. And as developers, we're bad at that. So that's the first thing we need to change. The next thing that we need is diversity. And frankly, this is something which in our business we are terrible at. Now, think about the musical group. Imagine you have a musical group made of 7 singers. Okay? 1 or 2 of those groups is interesting. A chart full of them would get really old. What you want in the musical group is a bunch of separate people all doing different things. So you need a drummer, and you need guitarists, and maybe you need a saxophonist, but what you don't need is everybody doing the same thing. And it doesn't even matter if they're really good at it. Somebody once asked Paul McCartney, is Ringo Starr really the best drummer in the world? And you know what he said? He's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that everybody has their job and they're doing it to the best of their ability and sufficiently well to suit the rest of the team. So you absolutely need that diversity. Now, later on, if we've got time, I want to talk a lot more about what diversity means in our business. But this is how most people recruit. They say, okay, we are an agile shop. We do C# here. So we are looking for highly agile C# programmers who are good at refactoring the kind of shitty code we write. And then, does this sound familiar? And then they set tests to find out if you're any good at that. So what you end up with is a room full of people who are all really good at creating the same shitty code and refactoring the same shitty code into the same shitty code that you started off in the first place. What you get is absolutely none of this diversity. You don't get this ecosystem. Now, the ecosystem is important because if you have a football team full of strikers, they are not going to score goals no matter how good they are. In our business, what we do is we solve problems. Every day we're faced with problems. We are puzzle solvers, which it's what motivates us to do our job. But if we only have one tool in the deck, then we can be faced with a problem which has a simple solution which we simply can't see. But when you say, or when a recruiter says, we need to recruit people, and you have seen this, who will fit our team, what they're saying is, we want to limit the diversity. When they say, and this is really wrong, it's better to pass on 10 good people than to hire one bad one, they are totally wrong. They're totally wrong, first of all, because there aren't that many good programmers in the world, but they're also wrong because what they fear is somebody else with a different perspective coming into the room and shaking things up. Damn it, man, that's what you want. You need people to come and shake you up because they can show you solutions that you didn't have in the first place. So, it's something which is absolutely essential to every single one of those high-functioning teams, and yet, in our business, we try to filter it out. Now, this is an important point, so I'm going to, again, put this back to you. Do you recognize this in your own recruitment strategies? Do you recognize this in the tests and the interviews that you have gone through? Or is this not something you recognize? Okay, go ahead. Please do.
With diversity, you want people that have the same values. If you don't have the same values, it's going to be difficult to instill those values in people. So diversity in general, yes, but in the values, you have to have the same values.
Oh, I do agree with you that people have to fit. And I do agree with you that getting equivalent values makes a lot of sense. If you have got somebody who is, it'd be very difficult to recruit somebody out of a military contractor into Greenpeace, for example, because the values are never going to fit. But if you've got somebody who is, who's now trying to make that move, then that, to me, would seem to be somebody very valuable to Greenpeace because they're going to be bringing a perspective which normally the kind of people who would apply wouldn't have. So, yes, yes. So you need a match at some level, but the technical competence match, I think, isn't the level that we need to be working at. I think that we're too fixated on technical competence. And again, I mean, I'll throw this back to you. When was the last time you were ever in an interview where they said, well, what are your values? And challenged them. Most of the time, they challenge your ability rather than what your underlying values are.
One of the last people I took on, I took somebody that was outside of a value match, and it's called a greater account.
I can believe that, yes. Okay. All right, so I accept what you're saying. It's just that most people don't test for it.
We
Yes?
profiling our face in what we call the axe murderer test.
How does that work?
I have actually known some that failed it.
Yeah.
Because when they started pushing him on some things, he just completely lost it at HR. So yeah, I mean, generally people are fine, but it will weed out. So.
And what's your axe murderer test trying to do? It's trying to elicit a strong emotional reaction?
No, it is challenging what you say your values are.
Okay. You have to admit, I mean, again, looking around the room, I'm gratified by both of you, but for most people, those sorts of things are in the minority. There are very few people, very few recruitment processes which challenge people's values. They challenge skills, and they challenge the skills to match, not the values to match. And I think it's a problem for us. Now, This came out several times, this idea of mutual respect. Again, going back to the musical group, you have to have the respect. You have to respect each other. If you're going to step up to a microphone with nothing between you and the audience apart from the band behind you, you have to trust them. So there's this sense of mutual respect going on. In the film crew, you have the same thing going on. You have this mutual respect. Now, you said earlier on about the single point of failure, but this is the point of this. The point about the mutual respect is that you say, we know we need your skill, and I know I couldn't do it, and we all know that you couldn't do my job, but together, we're stronger. And you absolutely have to have that to have a high-functioning team, because if you don't have that, then the alternative is everybody has the same skills, you don't have that respect. You might recognize that they have the same skills as you are, but that doesn't make you respect them. That puts you in competition with them. That makes you their rival. Because it means that you're neck and neck in every discernible respect. It means that you're not spread out. So not having the diversity means that you haven't a chance of getting that mutual respect. But the mutual respect is absolutely essential to a high-functioning team, because that means that everybody says, they need me, and if I go off on holiday, or if I show up late, well, if you've got that respect, that really matters. And in fact, this extends into something even stronger. That is mutual dependence. Now, this comes absolutely to the point that you were making about the single point of failure. Teams are teams. Teams are not collections of individuals. Programmers are not fungible. They're not like money, where one £5 note is as good as any other £5 note. Programmers, developers, everybody in these high-functioning teams, they each have their role to play, and it's like a stool with 3 legs, and you take one leg away and it'll fall over. Now that is what a team's made of. A team is a bunch of people working together and depending on each other and respecting each other, because without everybody pulling their weight, then you don't get the results that you want. Now this seems so obvious to me that this is what is required of a team. And yet, what do? We actually construct our working practices to make people disposable. Everybody's expendable. Nobody is indispensable. Well, if they're not, it's not a team. It's a collection of individuals, like what Kuryakin was doing. I'm sorry, speak up.
In a high-performing sports team, everybody is absolutely disposable. Look at Premiership football teams. As soon as a player doesn't perform, they will be sold at the next window, or they'll be pushed out by their team. Absolutely,
because what's happening here is that everybody's depending on them, and there's this sort of implicit promise, you can do what's being expected of you, and you can do what you've shown that you can do. And then when the moment they can't, that's the point at which they're dispensable. It's the point at which they break the contract. It's the point at which they're no longer delivering what the team needs to be a successful team. So that really does illustrate the point here. So we need this mutual respect and mutual dependency. And when you have that, a funny thing happens. The team actually becomes a cohesive unit. I was describing what happens in a film crew. In a film crew, they become friends. They will live together. I mean, sometimes they're living together in the same trailers or in the same tents, but they become a very coherent group of people. And the social bonds extend far, far beyond the working relationship. The same thing happens in a musical group. Even if they're just playing in pubs, they've got a friendship which extends outside that group. And one of the things that happens in commercial groups is that when the friendship fails, then the group also fails, no matter how much respect they've got for each other. And so you see these groups self-destructing because the friendships aren't holding. But this is what it means to be a team, to have that sense of dependency on each other, and to know that you can trust each other, and to know that somebody's not going to just piss off on holiday for 2 weeks when you're 3 weeks from the deadline. When you've got a team, it doesn't even cross people's minds. Now, the last thing that you need, all of this stuff is not enough unless you've got something which actually holds the team together. What is it that gets you up in the morning? What gets you into work, struggling through in those appalling A&E conditions, or with no money at Boeing, or whatever it is? What is it that's holding you together? It's actually having a vision. It's something that you believe in. It's a reason for going to work. And in the very first part of this talk, one of the things that came out was I'm making a difference. I'm producing something which everybody uses. It wasn't even about the respect of your peers or even the respect of your customers. You were, that was your example, wasn't it? It was about the fact that you're feeling good in yourself. I know that this is a thing that's worth doing. And it's that thing that gets you up and that holds you together and that keeps the team moving on. You need that engine, you need driving. I've forgotten the guy's name, I'm sorry, I've got porridge brain at the moment. But there's a chap who talks about the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And he says, if you can construct one of these, it needs to be just out of reach. It needs to be something where if you run a technique like that, you might just touch it with your fingertips. If you get a team together and you articulate that goal, you will get it 9 times out of 10. And if you don't, you'll learn something along the way anyway. And he says this BHAG is one of the recipes for success. Now, how many people go to work and all they're doing is keeping a system running? They're doing basic triage or basic maintenance. That's not a goal. Okay, how many people are going to work and their goal is to increase turnover by 25%? That's not a BHAG either. A BHAG is to make a computer as simple to use as a fridge. A BHAG is to put civilians on the moon. Who said SpaceX? Okay. A BHAG is to have a Mark V tunnel between Los Angeles and Tokyo. Who's working on that? Is that Musk doing that or somebody else? Right. Those are big, hairy, audacious goals. And those will motivate a team no matter how shitty the conditions, no matter how little you pay them, because that's something that gets you out of bed. Now, they don't need to be enormous. They don't need to be world-changing. They can be small. This is something that Johnson's proved. This is something even that the GitHub proves, that you can say, this small area, we can make it better. We can leave it better than we found it. And when you've done it, you know you've done it. And that's one of the characteristics of these visions and these goals. You actually know when you've done them. Same as the film. Everybody goes, thanks, have a nice life, it's been cool. The goals are like that. And it means that you're allowed to dissolve the team at that point. So, high-value teams, high-functioning teams, look like this. This is your team in a box. This is not a bit how we build our teams in our business, is it? Everybody's gone quiet. Nobody's laughing anymore. Any observations at this point? Anybody wants to say anything? Anybody wants to challenge me?
Yeah, I'm having trouble matching, for instance, Johnson's with all of these bullet points. They were actually, the example you gave where they were so successful was that they all acted like the same, and they all went out and pulled things off the shelf. That doesn't require, it requires basic competence. Stretch doesn't seem to play in, diversity doesn't. And I have the same complaint about, say, a symphony orchestra, which I think came up as well.
Okay, let me take one example. Let me go with Johnson's then, because that's fair enough. Johnson's already had its people up to a basic level of competence. They knew who they were. They were salesmen, they were chemists, they were product developers, sometimes they were just secretaries, sometimes they were, whatever it was. But each person had a certain level of competence. But that level of competence was used to, further the goals of the company. The goals of the company and the vision of the company was very, very clearly articulated and has been for a very long time. So each person knew what contribution they were making. And they knew how, if they were to be delinquent in the way they did their job, they knew how that would impact the vision. So everybody bought into that vision. Not everybody does. They actually, some people join the company and they leave fairly quickly because they can't buy into it. Everybody is stretched. One of the things that Johnson's is very good at is helping people to develop personally and professionally, and it's just something that they happen to do. And one of the reasons that they do it is because constantly they're pushing responsibility down the tree. Now, this is something which they started in the 20s, which was highly unusual for the 20s. About the only other company who did this was 3M's. But they're saying, let's take our decisions in as local a context as we possibly can. So they were empowering people, and they were constantly providing this stretch with the career development. The diversity came in because each person understands their role in the company. The chemists understand their chemists, the secretaries understand their role, and so on. But the net result of this was that when they had the attack, everybody knew what they had to do. So the salesmen were on the phone right away. We know this is happening. We know this is what we're doing about it. Just relax. Don't sell anything. Somebody will be around. They didn't even need to organize that somebody would be around. They just knew that somebody would be around. If it was a secretary, she knew what she had to do. She knew she had to clear the shelves. The thing is, they didn't need this command and control because everybody knew what it was they had to do. Everybody had sufficient authority already in place to be able to step up and to be able to decide what to do for the greater good of the company. Did people get wrong decisions? Probably they did. But that's not the point, because they took good enough decisions in the heat of the moment. The mutual respect and mutual dependency was based on that. It was based on the salesman being able to say, it's okay, we've got it covered, and knowing that it was covered without actually having to call somebody else, without having to call the manager and say, what would you like me to do about this? What are you doing about this? He just knew that would be covered. And similarly, when the people went into the supermarkets and they were sweeping the stuff off the shelves, they knew there wasn't going to be a problem. Partly because they knew that the other people in the company had dealt with it. They probably didn't even know how, but they knew it was being taken care of, and partly because the company itself at this point had such a good relationship with its customers that they were happy to let this happen. So this is actually, Johnson's is an object lesson in how this structure works.
But you've given, I guess where I'm confused, is you've given sort of two versions of diversity. On the one hand, you said, yes, I have to have a chemist doing the job of a chemist and a secretary doing the job of a secretary. I agree, that's tautological. But you've also said that we should hire people that come in that don't have the skills we need because they might make the company a better place. And those seem to actually be at overheads. I mean, how do
Okay. Right, that's a fair enough question. And it's actually a very good question, so I'm going to try and play it back for the recording. What you're saying is that what we're asking for is a level of basic competency, but we're also asking for a level of diversity, and the diversity is not consistent with that basic competency. Now, actually, that's not true. You cannot be in my band if you can't sing. You need to be able to perform at a certain level. You need to understand. That's the basic competence. But once you can sing, I mean, the very first time I walked up to an audition, they said, well, can you sing? And I said, yes. And they said, well, what can you sing? And I said, well, actually, I'm used to singing classical. And they went, oh, we don't want a classical singer. We want some raw singer. And I said, I can do raw. But if I hadn't have had the argument, then they wouldn't have known. If it had just been, a job ad for a raw singer, then, or if I had put an ad, proposing to be a classical singer, then they wouldn't have called me. So in that sense, you have to have the basic competence. If you are programming in C#, you have to have people who can program C#. But the value lies in the fact that they can do other things as well, and they can bring other things to the party. And at that point, what happens is the task itself starts to migrate. And later on, you get people who don't program in C#, but do know an awful lot about mathematical programming, or know an awful lot about database programming, or know an awful lot about networking, and they don't actually have to do that level of programming at all, because that's already been covered by somebody else. So as your team becomes more diverse, then what you understand by basic competence becomes a much more wider-reaching affair. So you do have to get from there to here, and you do have to have a level of basic competence, but the diversity is valuable too. In fact, the diversity is also essential. These are all essentials. Are you happy with that answer? Yeah. Okay. Any other observations? Any other questions?
Is there also not an element of learning from each other, especially for developers? I think it's very important to be part of a team where you're able to learn something from each other. If you're not able to do that, obviously you feel that, okay, I'm doing a great job, but I'm not adding any value to myself. So
that's the purpose of the stretch. That's what stretch means. That's where you're adding value to yourself. And it has to be designed into the way that you're working. If you have a bunch of people on a team and they have different skills, then of necessity, because they're working together, then people are going to see other ways of working, they're going to see other kinds of solutions, and that in itself is going to be mind-expanding, even if you don't follow them into that space. But part of what would happen is that if somebody can say, well, look, I've got half of a solution here, can you help with the other half? That itself functions as a stretch. So a lot of the time, there's there's an approach which says that what we need to do is, if we're bringing somebody into a team, say a junior, and the team is full of people who are more experienced, then what we want to do is to bring them up to the same level of competence. Actually, I would say we want to bring them up to their own level of competence to help, to complement everybody else, rather than to get everybody all the same, because once everybody's all the same, They're not a team anymore, they're a contest. And I know this is a different way of thinking about it to the way most of you, to the way most people talk, but I do believe, I've seen it so many times, that when everybody is the same, when everybody's treading on their own toes, when it looks like a school football team, people get their toes trodden on and their legs broken. You had your hand up? You didn't? No. Okay, sorry.
I mean, each of these points individually you can sort of look at and say they make common sense.
Yes.
So as an example of diversity and mutual respect, if you don't have mutual respect, you won't be able to come forward challenging someone and having that sort of conversation, otherwise it gets quite personal. But how much of this is post-rationalisation? So you pick examples of Johnson, but while this sounds like the sort of stuff, is it good to great? The book was written 10 years ago, whatever it was. Well, how do we know how many examples of failure there have been where they probably had all of these tendencies?
Okay, so the question you're asking is this sufficient? Or are you asking, is this merely spurious?
No, I think a lot of the times, is it a case when we look at teams that have done well or succeeded, that we then post-rationalise them, sort of say it's because they had diversity, stretch, etc. What about those examples where they failed? Do we really know whether they didn't have mutual respect, diversity, etc.?
No, we don't. I have studied teams that have been successful and which most people would consider to be successful and tried to understand what they have in common. It may be that there are factors here which I haven't seen. But what I can say is that every high-functioning team which I can find and every team which generally people would accept as being high-functioning has these properties. So if you don't have them, you're doomed anyway.
But without knowing how many of the non-high-functioning teams have those same traits, you don't really know if it's a differentiator.
Oh, we know it's a differentiator because we know that there are no teams which are not high-functioning which don't have these traits. What we don't know is if there should be more on the list. And you're right, I don't. The only way that we can do it is try it. But if we do what all of the good teams do, that's bound to give us an advantage in the race. But you're right, I can't show you why this is exhaustive.
Because one of the points is around measurements, and if we're going to use some business text, shall we say, a lot of those things, if a company does well, you'll attribute certain things to them and sort of say it's because the CEO or the team leader valued diversity, etc. If they do really badly, then you tend to sort of say, well, it's because they weren't valuing diversity or they weren't valuing stretch.
And I'll tell you what, if you can do that, if you can look at teams that fail, or teams that are not delivering what the business wants, or even teams full of people who are grumpy and keep leaving, and if you say, well, it's because they haven't got sufficient diversity, well, what more do you want, man? You've got what you asked for. You've got your explanation. If you find that you've got a team which is not functioning, even in spite of having all of these, then, yeah, it's worth looking at how they failed. And I'd be really interested. I mean, if you've got examples, let me in there. I will study them.
We tend not to look at the failures, we always
Indeed.
successes.
Indeed. And it's very hard to study failures because they're gone.
Depends what you call failure as well. If you look at the team that put Beagle out,
Yes.
the project failed, but I have no doubt that they were a hard-working, gelled-together team.
In fact, Beagle is a very good example because actually I would claim that that was a very successful team. It might not have been a successful mission, but even as it went down, they were cheering, they were clapping. Pilger, the guy who led it, I mean, he remained a star for months after that. So actually, I would say that that was an example of a very successful team. They were taking on a high-risk project, and everybody knew it was a high-risk project, so the fact that it failed as a project, as a mission, shouldn't reflect on their ability as a team. I would say that that's the kind of team that we should be modelling ourselves on. But indeed. A failed team would be a team that couldn't launch it. A failed team would be a team which actually, with 6 months to go, started putting it together with duct tape. That would be a failed team. But no, I think they were highly professional. How are we doing for time? Okay. Would you like to move on, or would you like to talk some more about these?
Can I ask one question?
Yes, of course.
At the beginning, when we were talking about the software places we would like to work in,
there were some words that came out that were quite interesting. They're actually not on there.
Okay, go on.
Autonomy,
Yes.
knowing your place, like with your place within the team, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Doing interesting things.
Yes.
A sense of perfection and excellence, and being the best.
Yes. Now then, being the best and a sense of excellence, that motivates some people very much. And in fact, I'm going to talk about that if we have time in a moment. But it doesn't motivate everybody. Some people actually don't care about excellence. And I know you're laughing. One of the things that we did was we introduced a programming test to sort the sheep from the goats, which was designed not to have any right or wrong answers. It was designed to allow people to show us who they were. And we trialed that inside the business, and most people were just too chicken to have a go, but there was a couple of people who did. And one guy came up with this piece of code, and he fancied himself as a programmer, and he delivered it, and everybody laughed. It was just appalling code. I mean, we'd never put it in a production chain. And everybody laid into it, and the poor guy, he was small already, and he just got smaller and smaller. And I said, listen, hang on. How long did it take you to write this code? And he went, 10 minutes. And I said, and how long did it take you to write yours? 2 days. And I said, could you have done in 10 minutes what he's done? I agree, we're never going to put this code into the production chain. But nobody else can do a mashup like this. This guy has value to you. If you can only see through what he's doing. Again, this was a problem of this sort of unified culture that everybody thought they had to produce code of a certain standard. The fact that he couldn't made him valueless, but actually he had a lot of value to bring precisely because he wasn't fixated on excellence. So excellence is a goal, it's an end in itself for some people, and if you try to create a culture which values excellence, like anything in aviation or space, then a hacker is not going to fit in there. But there are other places. Facebook was built on hackers. I mean, Facebook didn't care about quality. Didn't care about quality because it was trying to do it quickly, and it didn't care about quality. You could tell when you used it. But it didn't matter. Because if you go off on a hackathon, and 48 hours later you come up with half a startup, you don't care if it's rubbish, because if you need better code, another weekend will give it to you. Okay? So, that sense of excellence is not, it's only a goal to certain people. It's not a goal to everybody. What were some of the other words?
Autonomy.
Autonomy. Now, the thing about autonomy is that it's not enough to be autonomous. Nobody wants to work in a company where you get locked in an office and you just get on with it. That's hell. What they want is autonomy within the team. And in fact, what people usually want, and correct me if I'm wrong, those people who mentioned about autonomy, what you're looking for is the team to have an autonomy. So that either somebody can say to the team, well, this is what you're trying to accomplish, and they get to choose for themselves how to accomplish it and what shows to go to. Or else they can even pick objectives for themselves. I've got this great idea. I want to start developing it. But this is all about stretch. And it's all about this mutual dependency. This autonomy really means, can we get a team together and are we going to get valued as a result of what we do? So it's almost functioning at a meta level. It's the fact that other teams value the team in and of itself in the same way that the team members value each other. That's where that autonomy comes from. That's the physical manifestation of that.
Also, the managers are not going to say no every time they want to do something.
That's right. And there are some places where the managers will say no every time they want to do something. And some people enjoy that. I'm actually working with a bunch of programmers now, and I was told quite clearly they want to be told what to do. Don't ask them for their judgment. They don't have one. Just tell them what you want, and they will do it. And when I started talking to them, they said, yeah, that's absolutely right. Why don't you just tell us what you want? Why these endless meetings? Why is it that Western companies spend 80% of their time doing not useful work? I was saying, all right, look, I'll just give you a specification and you can get on with it. And they were happy. So different people value different things. Have you got any more words on the list?
The last thing that came up was doing interesting things.
And again, that's about stretch. Interesting means stretchy. Yes?
What about leadership? Because all teams tend, a leader will eventually evolve naturally. Is that a sign of a good, in teams that fail, is it a lack of leadership?
Do I believe that leaders emerge in every team? They do tend to, but I'm not sure that it's a prerequisite, because I have seen teams which develop their own momentum purely from the goal they were trying to pursue. I do think people like leadership to some extent, but I think that they like the right amount. So there is, I mean, there's a comment over here about how there might be other features in the team. If you've got people who don't fit the team personality-wise or culture-wise, then yeah, they can make a mess of it. So if you've got somebody who's too bombastic for the team and, you know, I'm the boss, follow me, then yes, he can do a lot of damage. But similarly, a team who needs leadership and doesn't have it, that can cause a lot of damage as well. But that's about the personal dynamics as well. And I haven't put that up here, but I have talked about it, that you still need that personal dynamics. You need to create a friendship. And in the musical groups where that friendship failed, then the groups failed. And so those personality types, they're important. I do want to talk more about personality types, but not directly about leadership. But I think that there's a lot in that, and I think it's worth looking at as well. Okay? Any more comments, any more observations? Yeah. I suppose this is how long is a piece of string. If you really put your mind to it, I'm sure you could undermine any team. But I have seen teams function in the most appalling of conditions. The A&E department is a good example. I mean, nobody would choose that life willingly. It just seems to be the way it's grown up. And there are other environments in which, you know, it's a really hard way to make a living, or it's a really hard way to hold the team together, but somehow they do seem to hold together. So I'm not going to say it's not a factor, but I am going to suggest that it's probably not the major factor. I mean, the building where I work in, we've got like big squishy chairs and everybody writes on the walls, and it's just like being at primary school again. It's great fun. But I don't think we need that to do the work that we do. I think it would affect them if we took it away, but I don't think it would affect them if they never had it. I think we could function just as well in a room like this if we hadn't have had it. Taking it away is making a statement. So I don't think, I wouldn't suggest that. Are you comfortable with that answer? Okay. Right. We've only got 10 minutes. I'm afraid I'm going to have to rattle through this. I have made a discovery. I mentioned before that developers aren't fungible. They're not like money or grains or sacks of wheat. I have discovered that programmers come in all different shapes and sizes. Now, you wouldn't think this is a major discovery, but I'm not talking about like physical shape. I'm talking about the way people approach problems. There are some people who, when you present a problem to them, they go, oh, okay, I understand that problem, and they go to their favorite tool and they start developing it. So what I'm saying here is that what they do is they look at the surface of the problem, and they have this narrow view of the tools, and they know how to put them together. And these people, they can achieve extraordinary skills. I've written it down as virtuosi. But these people, they absolutely know their tools, they absolutely know how to apply them to the problems, and they can get the problems solved very, very effectively. But that's not the only way of developing software. Some people do something else. What they do is they say, okay, I can see the problem that I'm trying to solve, and I can see 50 different tools. And so they throw these 50 tools into the pot. These are where the hackers come from. These people who can make a startup in 48 hours, this is how they do it. They don't do it by writing very fine code or by understanding the depths of a particular language. They do it because they go, bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, mix it up, bubble, bubble, time control, and boom, there's a solution. And they're very much faster. And they're faster because they've got this expansive vision. They've got this peripheral vision about the technology that's available to them, not this tunnel vision. They're not specialists, they're generalists. But they're still only looking at the surface of the problem. You present them with a problem, and they go, okay, this is what we make. If you give them requirements, they will write to the requirements. So this is all surface. What we're looking at here is the depth or the surface of a problem, and what we're looking at here, across here, is the expansion of how much of the technology space they can see. But there are some people who work down here, and I've characterized them as architects. Now, what's going on here is that the architect needs to understand a whole range of technologies, but he can't look at the surface of the problem. I mean, these guys, they've got a horizon of 2 weeks, or 2 days sometimes. These guys might have a horizon of 6 months because they're, doing this sort of, that sort of scale of project. But these guys, they're thinking 30 years ahead. So they can't look at the requirements. These guys complain that the requirements keep changing, so we have to have techniques like Agile. These guys don't care that the requirements are changing because they're changing as well. These guys have to predict the changes. They have to say, well, what are the requirements going to be in 30 years' time? So what they're saying is not, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? They're saying, what needs to be true for the problem that we're trying to solve even to make sense? So what they're doing is they're looking deep into the problem. They're not just looking at the surface of the problem, they're looking deep into the problem. And in order to solve that problem, in order to solve that deep problem, they have to have this very wide view of the technology that's available. Does that make sense? Systems guys sort of fit in between. Systems guys, they're not looking at the same kind of distance, they're not looking at the same kind of depth, but they still, because it's systems, they really do need to understand that they need this expansive view. The whole point about a system is that it's made of different kinds of technologies. Okay? Finally, you get the people down here. These people, they have this very, very fine view, this very narrow view of the technology. Narrower even than the virtuosi. But what they're doing, again, is they're looking deep, deep into the problem. They're not solving the problem that you've got. They're solving every problem that you might possibly have had, but haven't. And so this is a very, very different way of looking at the problems. These guys are really good at building the tools that enable the rest of the team to work, that power up the rest of the team. Now, 30-odd years ago, we used to have toolsmiths on teams doing this job. Now we tend not to. Now we tend to use the tools as they come available. But I think that's a shame. I think that we've lost something in doing that. The tools sort of fit here. But the compiler writers and the really deep, the people who build the infrastructure, that's where they live. The first time I put this picture up, I didn't have the ones in the middle, and somebody described it as a chav diagram. And I think that's a rather good picture. So this, I'm presenting to the world the chav diagram. Now, you're working in a team. You are being employed by somebody to do a certain job. Who are the best people to have on your team?
Depends on the job.
No, it doesn't.
If you want to start it in 24 hours.
If you want to start up in 24 hours, you're stuck with them. Yes, you're right. But other than that, actually, you want all of them. If you've got somebody, you need people who understand the tools and who understand the tools well. So you need people from this side. But if you're doing anything non-trivial, then you also need people who've got a more expansive view, who can see the systems, who can see technology ecosystems. If you want to get a job done, bug fixing, hacking, triage, even 6-month type development, then being up near the surface, actually solving the problem that you've got, there's a lot to be said for it. But on the other hand, if you're building a system which has got any kind of longevity to it, anything, if you're expecting it to last 10 years or more, then actually you want people who are anticipating the problem and clearing the path and making sure that you can actually expand into what you want to do next, and you're not painting yourself into a corner. And that's these guys. So when I was talking before about the recruitment process, which says we want the kind of people who can refactor this kind of mess in C# at this kind of speed, then what you're doing is you're looking at these people, and you're missing out on all the others. So you're actually condemning yourself to solving the same problems over and over again. If you get more of these people in at any level, then what you can do, these are the kinds of people, these are the different kinds of perspectives which can ease the problems and which can make your work more efficient in the future. Now, you said something, didn't you, about I'm sorry?
Learning from each other.
Learning from each other. This is the place to do the learning. This is where a good virtuoso can learn about systems thinking or can learn about projective thinking. And they don't necessarily need to be able to do it, but they do need to know that there is a type of thinking there, which when you have a very homogeneous ecosystem, you can't even see that they're there. So I think this picture is the way that people should be learning from each other, far more than learning the same skills from each other. So, when you're designing your recruitment systems, when you're designing your screening systems, rather than looking for people who all work the same, what you're looking for is to create a broad spread of these people across a team. Now, different kinds of working are going to put different amounts of weight in different parts of this picture. Like Alex says, sometimes you've got to do something in 48 hours and you need these people and anybody else is just going to be a distraction. But in general, what will happen is you'll start off small and you'll grow bigger. And as you grow a team, when you start, you know who you want. But as you grow the team, I think that what you should be trying to do is to cover more and more of this space with the people that you get. And as far as I can tell, these inclinations, they're who you are. It's very hard for somebody who is a natural hacker to become a compiler writer because they just don't get it. It's sort of built into who you are. So it's about finding out what people's inclinations are and then stretching them into these spaces and allowing them to lead the rest of the team. Does that make sense? Would you like to ask anything? Would you like to challenge me?
Hackers have a bigger effect on the team members because we've had some guys who are hackers and then you have huge numbers of people trying to fix what they've done in the past. And there's sort of this, one hacker is dozens of people.
But I would say, the question was, what happens if you have one hacker who makes a mess and then everybody else has got to spend the next 5 years cleaning up the mess? Well, don't clean up the mess, because what the hacker does, treat it as a prototype. There is a school of thought, I know it's not presently fashionable, but there's a school of thought that says plan to throw and away. You're going to have to do it anyway, so you might as well plan for it. So if you treat the original mashup as being, well, this is what we want to build, now let's see how to build it properly, then you don't have to clean it up, you just have to write it. And that actually is a good use of this kind of stuff. Well, and that becomes a management problem. But if you're going to entrust your entire livelihood to something that a hacker put together in 48 hours, well, more fool you. Okay, any more observations, any more questions? Okay, in that case, I'll just leave you with this. This is, once more, the team in a box. And this is the main thing that I wanted to show you today. That's me done. Again, that's really interesting.
No, I think they're doing fascinating stuff behind the scenes, but up front maybe it doesn't look like they're doing a whole lot. But I mean, their data work is incredible.
And
okay.
They're also working on AI. I mean, they are solving really big, cool problems.
They are.
Working to unimaginable scales.
They are. I think that what Facebook has done, in fact, is they started off with one kind of promise, and they said, look, it's really, really fun just to pile in here, and it's a scrum in the rugby sense. And now they've become a much more mature and adult and much more scientific company. And they've sort of almost alienated their fan base, which is interesting because they're still doing, I think they're a much more interesting company now than they used to be. Now, the one that's missing from this list...
Netflix and Spotify.
I'm sorry?
Netflix and Spotify.
Okay, Netflix and Spotify. They're also pretty good. Tell me why you've selected them.
Netflix because they seem to have a really healthy relationship with microservices, and that would be fun to work with. And I mean, I know people who work there love it. That's part of it as well. Spotify, kind of the same reason. A lot of Python, I can do that.
Yep.
Friendly people.
Okay, all right. The one that's missing is Apple. In my previous job, my team came to me and said, why are we doing this boring shit? Why can't we do what Apple did? And that was the language they were using to express their frustration with the job they were being asked to do. And yet you haven't picked it up. Is anybody prepared to stand up for Apple here?
They're a terrible software company.
Why?
Apple don't do software.
What do they do?
Apple, I mean, you can tell by their developer tools and the way the languages that they use are written that they're not developer focused. Apple are consumer focused.
They
the
are.
end point is the consumer, and if it's hard for the developer to create that content, they don't care, provided it's easy for the consumer to use. Not a good software company at all.
Okay. Now, you see, I think this is what's interesting about Apple, because the impression that Apple projects is that they are totally consumer-focused. They make a computer as easy to operate as a fridge. They're renowned for their design. And yes, they make it hard for programmers. Jobs used to reduce programmers to tears, but he was doing it in pursuit of a vision. And the reason why I think Apple is important and should be on the list is because out of all of these companies, Apple is the one which really does have a vision. I mean, Google is sort of doing all sorts of things. Facebook is into a general kind of big data and is trying to be a new Google. All of these people are trying to do things, but Apple has this sense of this is what we're put on the planet for. And the people who are favorable towards Apple, this is what they're responding to. It's this big goal, this big sense of vision, this sense of purpose that's in the company. Would anybody like to disagree with that? Go ahead.
Basically, you look at Apple, you just look at the machine and it's designed to make money.
Yeah, I don't think most people consider, they may consider themselves to be a software company, but I don't think most people in this room would perceive Apple as being a software company.
Okay, that is really interesting. As I say, 18 months ago, Apple would have been the first on the list. Gone for. And I know it's late, and I know you all want to get back and have a beer, and it's been... How are you enjoying the show so far? It's good? You got what you came for? This is a talk about building great teams. This is absolutely, definitely audience participation, well, team participation, so you guys at the back are not safe. I'm curious. I would very much like to know why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of this. I told you it was audience participation. It starts right at the beginning. Why are you here?
I am a Java developer, and I have been volunteered as a Scrum Master for a small team.
Okay.
And to be honest, I don't have a lot of experience in team building, getting teams to work together, and I'd like to know.
Okay. So basically, you're now in the position where you're managing the team and you want to learn some skills. Is your team a well-functioning team already?
Moderately.
Okay, let's put that question out. How many people think that they're in a highly functioning team?
Did you say highly?
A highly functioning team, you do. Okay, well, 4 or 5 out of maybe 100, not many. This is quite interesting. I am a consultant. As you can imagine, as a consultant, I have been to an awful lot of job interviews. And I keep hearing the same thing at interview after interview. Get out, don't come back. No, not that one. We are a #1 team. We are the best team. We have the best people on our team. Do you think you're good enough even to interview with us? I guess you've all heard that, right? Merely by the law of averages, they can't all be right. But actually, getting into some of these teams, a lot of them are dead wrong. A lot of these teams are highly dysfunctional. They are not the best people. They are not the best functioning teams. And so I became interested in what it was that makes a well-functioning team, what it is that people feel that they're building when they're building a highly functioning team, and what's going wrong when the bosses and the interviewers say, we have a highly functioning team, and all of the troops on the ground actually disagree with them, and they're all complaining. So, I have a question to ask. Since people talk about these highly functioning teams, since people talk about the best team, since most of us are not working in them, but we all have a vision of what they are, what are they? Who has the best teams in the world? So, this is the question I'm going to ask you. Anybody. If you could work for any software company, and I presume you're all software developers, yeah? Okay. If you could work for any software company in the world, who would it be? Who would it be, sir?
Google.
Google. Now, I was going to do this, actually, as a family fortunes game. We asked, what's the best? And now, go ahead.
I suppose it's also ethically doesn't appeal to me personally. The whole paradigm taking over the world. Although Microsoft comes under.
Yes.
And Google.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, all three of them were trying to take over the world, but in different ways. Okay. But, you know, they're trying to take over the world, but you've got to admire their ambition. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It almost became a generic name like Uber, didn't it? They did well. Be fair, they did well. The reason for doing this is that there is a pattern developing. You can see that the companies that you admire, the companies that you're purporting that you would want to work for, they've all got similar sorts of things going on. Okay, leave out the apple with the vision thing, because we're going to look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. But we're seeing the same sort of things. It's about autonomy. It's about respect. It's about having interesting things to do. It's very much about the nature of the work and your place in the world as you're doing that work, right? It's not enough to be doing interesting things. There is not one military company on this list. So it's not enough to be doing interesting things. They're doing interesting things in the military companies, but they're not the kind of people who you admire because they're not doing it for the right reasons. There are companies here who are doing some there are companies who are doing some very interesting things, but they're doing it in very formal, very restrictive ways. They try to box people in, and they say, well, become specialists and learn a very narrow trade. But that's not exciting, because what you prefer, what's coming back here, is you want to be able to have the autonomy to do what you want to do. Okay? You want to be able to make a change within the company. So now, what I want to do is I want to widen this question. I want to ask a slightly bigger question, which is what we were pushing towards a moment ago, which is, if it's not a software company that you want to work for, if it's some other kind of company, who would it be? Who are the companies who you admire most in the world who are not making software? Who wants to start? Go ahead, sir. SpaceX. Okay. Now, do you want to tell us about them? They are. And why is that interesting? Have you seen Gravity? Who wants to be in space? Do you know what they like to work for? No idea. Anybody have any software company to work for? Our survey said Google. So, why have you selected Google? What's so good about Google?
It's like a lot of fun, you get a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting work.
More, anybody else? It looks like a lot of fun, you get a lot of freedom, you're doing interesting work. Come again? Actually, they're not, but okay, it's a good observation. From what I've heard, they pay lousy. Any other observations? What was that? Respect. Respect. Whose respect?
Mutual respect.
Yeah. Yes, within the team. Once you're there, then you know you've made it, everybody else knows you've made it, everybody treats you as a grown-up. Yeah, that's the big thing about Google, and it's one of the things that people do say about it. So you have the freedom to do what you want, you have the ability to make change, and you get the respect once you get in there. Okay, good. Another suggestion. Who would you like to work for? If you could work for anybody. You're actually allowed to choose your own company if you want. You don't have to, there's no bosses here.
I actually like to feel I'm doing something of value, so I would probably go back to be a civil servant again.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm asking specifically about software companies, but I'm going to come back and ask you about that, because I'm going to ask about other types of companies later on. So I will come back to you. If I don't, remind me. Stick your hand up and go, Joe, what's your problem? Somebody else. Who else would you like to work for?
Well, maybe not a software company, but like there are divisions of NASA that I would love to work for.
Again, I'll come back to you, because that's part of the next one. Software companies. Who? GitHub. Okay, good one. Tell me about GitHub. And if anybody has better handwriting than me, I invite you to come and try it. Sorry, where's GitHub? Yes?
I don't know.
Respect from,
my peers,
yeah.
and sort of building to be useful that people use all the time.
Okay. So the main points that you're bringing out here is that you're getting respect from your peers, but you're also making a difference in the world.
Maybe actually not respect, maybe just that actually people are really grateful for the job I'm doing.
Yeah, so you're making a change. That's the fundamental thing. It's not you can go to a party and say, hey, I work for GitHub, aren't I great? It's not about that. Okay, more. Any others?
Other companies or other reasons for GitHub?
Either. Have you got more reasons for GitHub?
They're really open about what they do, and they talk about their internal processes, and they seem pretty sound.
And why is that important to you?
I think because they're the general tradition of tech being a fairly open field where people share knowledge, so you don't just, you try not to stockpile it up. Well,
So,
maybe you do in a company.
can I summarize that by characterizing it as a sense of community? Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's a voice over here. Yes.
So I was going to say, because you put company very specifically about how does open source kind of fit into this? Is that where you go with the word community? So if I had a choice, I might actually not work for a company and choose to work on open source projects. And I would do that on the sense of I want to give something back to the community as a whole.
Okay, I'm going to accept that because I think that's an important thing. I mean, it starts in the sense of community. It's the idea of giving back. One of the reasons why I'm asking you to concentrate on companies is because a company name it acts as a sort of a focus, a concentration of a culture. And so different companies have markedly different cultures, and we can use that to analyze them. The trouble with open source, it doesn't work that way because it's everybody just working on their own in a much more separate, much less cohesive manner. So it's like pointing to fog. There's nothing really there to analyze in these terms. But yes, certainly the observation is very well made that open source does deliver that sense of community. Okay, any other suggestions? Microsoft, okay. There was a time when they were absolutely hated, but they seem to have rehabilitated themselves now. Tell me, why have you selected Microsoft?
Because they're developing stuff all the time. They bring out really exciting new tools.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again,
It's used worldwide.
yeah. So again, it's this very wide usage, and it's the fact that they're explorative and innovatory.
Yes, like AI, they're doing lots of work there.
Yeah.
And not just business.
Okay. Anybody would disagree with that? Okay, that's interesting, because 18 months ago, people would have done. 18 months ago, people would have said, Microsoft, oh, so boring. All right, any other examples?
Valve.
Sorry, who?
Valve.
Valve.
Yeah, make
Okay. I'm sorry, you probably can't see this at the back at all. Tell me about Valve.
Apparently they have a very flat structure.
Yes.
Employees are given freedom to work on what they want, what they feel their value. So you might end up with a whole bunch of guys working on a particular software project for the day, leaving other stuff behind because they feel like they're more value.
So again, this is absolutely about the freedom to do what you want. Okay. This idea of the freedom to do what you want keeps coming up. I'm actually going to come back to this in a moment. I'm really surprised because there's one company that hasn't appeared yet, which, go on. Facebook. Okay. Why Facebook? Okay, all right. Well, I'm sorry, you volunteered. You're in the frame now. Tell me about Facebook.
I don't like Facebook.
You don't?
So I wouldn't have picked, yeah, so but Facebook is kind of you train the kid on the block, kind of does cool stuff, but isn't quite that thing anymore that it used to be.
Okay. So it was the trendy kid on the block, it was doing good things, and now it's lost its way. And is anybody here prepared to stand up and defend Facebook?